I remember when I became, CEO of Job Capital, and one of the very first board meetings I had with some new customers coming in. My CFO at the time was great, terrific guy, early to mid 40s, wore the pinstripe suits, and someone asked a question about the business and pointed the question to my CFO. And this is what a great male ally does. He turned around and he said, "Jo's the CEO of the company, she's best placed to answer that question." That's male allyship right there.
Hey Jo, hey Hugh.
Hi Liz, hi Hugh.
Jo, thank you so much for joining us today. Obviously, we're great friends anyway, but can you just give us a sense of the purpose behind Inspiring Rare Birds?
Sure, I launched Inspiring Rare Birds, Hugh, in 2014, and there was a catalytic moment for that to happen. I'd been running my business Job Capital since 2006, and I was getting a little bit itchy and a little bit bored with it, which as entrepreneurs do as they run through ideas and think about what can happen next in life. But I realised when I was standing on stage accepting the PCA Foundation Award for my contribution to technology and community in 2012, I was at Parliament House in New South Wales, and a sea of faces were welcoming me to accept the award. I was about to give my acceptance speech, and looking out into this crowd, I saw men's faces everywhere. There was academics, politicians, captains of industry. And I just had this little moment and thought, where are all the women in this industry? And it wasn't a critical question, it was an inquisitive, curious question. And I kind of had this moment where I thought, am I here just because they need a woman to win this year? Did something quite bold, and I went to my old public school, my high school and my primary school, and I had with the confidence of the Department of Education, and I interviewed about 30 young girls between the ages of 7 and 18. And I asked them lots of things, specifically about who they wanted to become as they grew. Not what job do you want to get when you grow up and leave school, but who do you want to become as you grow, which is a very purposeful question in itself. They kind of told me, one wants to be a writer, one wanted to be on television, one wanted to be a school teacher, one wanted to be a nurse. And I got curious and said to them, well, what about business? Have you thought about going to business? Does anyone know what an entrepreneur is? And of the girls that knew what it was, every single one of them told me it was a man. It was a man's job. So this is this real big, super aha moment I've had twice. So my bubble burst pretty quickly that day, and that became my mission right then and there, to create a movement that gave young women role models and luminaries and older women they could look up to and learn from and connect with, to create a sense of who they could become as an entrepreneur or a leader in the future.
Yeah, so in doing my research for this conversation today, I discovered that there wasn't a single appointment to the ASX 200 of a woman to the role of the CEO. And to hear your story, honestly, from my perspective, feels quite shocking because I'd imagine that we'd actually come a lot further than this. This has been on the agenda for at least a decade, if not 3 decades. And it just seems to me that we're not even moving the dial at the most fundamental level of participation, at the top end of town.
There's so much to talk about in just that little bit that you've mentioned there, Hugh. When you look at the ASX businesses in Australia, they have gone backwards. It's really sad. The numbers are declining. And if you look at some of the surveys and research that's been done, particularly by chief executive women, it's still 96% of CEO appointments are of men. Now, most appointments that are made at a CEO level are people that in their previous roles were CFOs. The representation of CFOs as women is about 12% of all CFOs across that ASX 200. So we haven't just got, it's not even a leaky pipe. We don't even have a pipe. There's not the talent moving through businesses and being pointed to executive roles and taken through leadership pathways to get to an executive role position where they could even be considered for a CFO and then a CEO role. So on the basis of that sort of system, it's not going to work, is it? It's not possible that it can work.
Well, actually, it reminds me of, you might remember if you read Malcolm Gladwell's Outliers. So in Outliers, he talked about how hockey players who were born in January tend to be the ones who ended up in the pro league because the intake was in January, they were bigger, they got more encouragement, and it just meant this talent pool at the, the November, December or the end of the year just wasn't accessed for professional hockey when they did the analysis. And so the solution to that was, well, take an intake, across all, the whole year and open up the rest of the talent pool. When we look at women, we have a talent pool of women who are parents of only 2/3 of the available workforce, which would make up something like only 1/3 of the total available workforce. So we can only expect 1 in 3 women at best under those numbers to actually participate. And then you get all these reinforcing factors that actually reinforce that situation. So it's no surprise at this stage that we only have, a small percentage getting into these CFO roles from a participation perspective. But then you consider other things like coming out of the workforce, you lose momentum, you might lose confidence, you might lose context, you might lose political capital in your role in that organisation. What is the nature of the challenge? Like what are the dimensions of this challenge as you see it?
I'll try and put it into pieces. I think the first part is perception. Professor Ray Cooper from the University of Sydney, who's a global expert in D&I, did a bit of research, and she found that 70% of men who were interviewed in her gender equality research didn't think that there was any problems with equality in their workforce. A staggering 70% of women thought there was. And what was most devastating about that kind of research, and it's very recent stuff, is that research is not done with participants who are older and have been in the workforce and been in leadership for 20 or 30 years. The people that were surveyed are between the ages of 16 and 40. So they're all of our future leaders, our future female and male leaders, who are still having the same conversations, Hugh, that we were having 10 or 20 years ago. So you can see that there's this real perception issue. And I can't see how that's going to change unless there's systematic changes in organisations that have built essentially by men, for men, and changing them and even from your design thinking perspective, how do you redesign a system so that everybody's included?
Yeah, I think this whole, there is a design challenge here for all of us. We actually recently delivered a major design project that required a significant uptick in design-related talent, which is an area that has much better representation of female talent than perhaps in IT. And because of that, we suddenly found ourselves with a lot more women in these teams jamming with us on the solution and working with our clients than we had for the previous months. And that energy and the tone and the creativity that actually comes with that, as soon as we rolled out of that project, you actually felt the stark loss of that experience. And really connecting people to the quality of what happens when you have a truly diverse team and the joy, the fun that you have, was something I actually just recently experienced, literally only a few weeks ago. And I think this needs to be brought to life for people, right? Like to actually see and experience what happens when you have a vital, flourishing, collaborative community of people represented, cross-gender, cross-culture, cross-demographic, and how that unlocks value. And then to bring that experience as a sense of motivation for how we might inspire the rest of the organisation to take up the challenge rather than just make it a tick box exercise, which it often is in CSR, and it can be seen as a really boring subject for some people, which is ridiculous.
It's at that point, Hugh, when the person is selected for the role, if they're identified as an emerging young woman who's talented, or an emerging young leader who's talented, or an emerging leader, it's at that point we need to have the conversation around their life career. So when they become of an age where they decide to have a family, whether it's in their 20s or their 30s or their 40s, because that's all possible now, the culture of an environment has to be such that that conversation with their leader or HR, whoever the function is safe and it's comfortable and it's open. And it's not just, say, me going to my boss and saying, I'm thinking about having a baby. It's when I have my review each year and my leader says, hey, how's life going for you? I want you to know that if there's a time you're thinking about having a family, we're going to support you. And this is the way we're going to do that for you. So the company's taking a proactive approach to women having children, raising children, but it should also be done for guys as well, so that there's an equal perception around men wanting to have time off to enjoy their family and enjoy their children, and not have this stigmatism that is attached to that, which happens a lot at the moment. So first of all, we've got to get that conversation right, so the pathway's safe and it's available. And what woman doesn't want to work for a company that has that conversation?
And to that, for that matter, what man doesn't as well? I feel that, you know, I have a 4-month-old child that, and we are juggling these issues right now and we're discussing them.
Yeah.
And, you know, working at it's kind of every level of the system, like at the one level, the participation rate, making it appropriate and culturally balanced that men should take.
This is our cultural norm that we have this conversation.
Yeah, 100% that men would also take time out to
Absolutely.
be the primary caregiver or parent.
Because the opposite of that, if that doesn't happen, we get women who are excelling through their leadership pathways, and men as well, and when they go off and have children, through our research and I guess through my lots and lots of conversations with HR and women in very, very large multinational organisations and global companies, these women will leave to have a family and they lose confidence. They sit at home thinking, I'm not in touch with the business anymore. I don't feel like I'm included. Someone younger, faster, smarter has probably taken my job. I don't know if I'm valid anymore in the business or my skills are valid. And the exact opposite is true. You know, with life comes wisdom and with experience comes wisdom as well. So having someone who has life and family wisdom as well as business and skill wisdom, I think the combination is undeniably more attractive.
There's a design opportunity there as well, and that is to design for that structure. So why don't we have an opportunity for women to, or men, whoever happens to be the primary parent in that situation, to have an ongoing connection with the employer in an advisory role as a subject matter expert.
Yeah.
You know, we're now, more and more organisations are working in an agile fashion. There are different ways to include people in the workflow that actually honours their talent in a part-time way. You know, there are different ways to do things. This is just a design challenge, and it's a challenge of consciousness and design, in my view.
I think it's more than just a design challenge, because it's also about asking folks to shift some very deep and long-held behavioural norms, individual expectations. It's asking us to step outside our family of origins culture. So I think, you know, when we look at it as saying it's just a design challenge, I think there is a huge element of deep empathy that's required right up front at the start of that. And I know corporations and organisations intend and have the intent to want to do the right thing. It's knowing in which order to address things, I suppose how to get there in order to affect change. And, you know, Joe, you were referring to some data, and it was published fairly recently in the press here as well. And it feels like it would almost take a generation to shift the dial a little bit for women. So I'm curious about what are some of the things that organisations can do now immediately around really reshaping this conversation, because I know it goes beyond things like quotas. You know, what are the tangible efforts that can be made?
I think, again, we'll go back to, like, I think blind recruitment is such an easy thing to implement. There was a symphony orchestra in the UK who did this, and they blind interviewed all the musicians for a symphony. And miraculously, when they did that, so all the players are playing behind a curtain, no one can see anyone. And when the results came out of who was hired, miraculously, it was completely diverse and inclusive.
Wow.
On all levels, culturally, age and gender. So take the names off the CVs and go by what you read, not by who you think you're reading about, and what, particularly with a cultural slant. Sometimes, I mean, it's not so much anymore, but people with perhaps a culturally hard to pronounce name or surname could be, unbiasedly put into a bucket that they don't really belong in from the first read of their CV. I think this is a really funny one, but it seems to happen everywhere. Women are not the people that need to go and buy the birthday cakes and the birthday presents. And, it's traditional. I've seen it in every business I've worked for, where it's always one of the women that goes running around doing all that stuff, where it's actually everyone's job to celebrate everybody's individual celebrations. It sounds so simple, but it just happens that way in Australian business for some reason. And the same as like cleaning up the sink and cleaning the kitchen.
So Jo, when it comes to diversity and inclusion, what does done look like?
It's a really big question, and I hope that I'm still around to see a country, I don't think a world, but a country where this really exists from a walk the talk perspective, where businesses are talking about it, they're exercising what they're saying, and people are being hired on the basis of skill and talent and not what they look like or where they're from or how old they are or their gender. Now, I can't see that happening in my lifetime. The purpose of Rare Birds is built because, it's not a business that's going to pay the mortgage, but it is a business that I hope goes out of business at some point, because when it goes out of business, that's when I know my job's done.
We are trying to really rebalance this equation as much as we can with a really strong ICT bias in our workforce, which means we're already dealing with a lot of scarcity. And what I'm seeing is that, I think you mentioned that in the McKinsey report, 21% of organisations that have a strong diversity have above average profitability. It makes me think, is that a cause or is that an effect? Like, is that group actually attracting the women because they're more profitable and they have the resources and they're running better businesses that actually creates that effect? Or is it a consequence of the diversity inside the organisation? Because what I'm seeing is it's a bit like a soccer team, at school, where if you get a chance, if you're last to pick the team, you don't necessarily get the best players. And the more powerful organisations with the bigger budgets, the bigger resources, the bigger brands, they're the ones who can actually step in and get access to the talent. Is there something in that? Am I seeing something that's real? Is that real?
Let me ask you a question in response to really frame my answer to that. If you saw two companies on the ASX that were tech ITC businesses, they were both at sort of the same revenue points, and one of them was all men and one of them had a diverse and inclusive culture, which one would you more likely to buy shares in?
The diverse one, no brainer. Yeah, so that's a good reason to have the diversity, but it's almost like a self-reinforcing reality. Diversity begets diversity, and those who are left on the sidelines, who are struggling to access the scarce talent, and are trying their best potentially, perhaps, to do something about it.
It's going to get harder.
It's going to get harder. So you've got to break because there are these reinforcing loops where it's sort of separating the haves from the have-nots in the diverse equation. Yeah. How do we break that so we can get more diversity in those who actually experience diversity?
It's a bit of a double-edged question, but if I look at a company like Canva, who was yesterday valued at about 60 billion?
54 billion.
Obviously, Mel Perkins is one of the co-founders with Jeff Albright, and they have programs with now Mel's probably 30 something. She's under 40.
34.
Yeah?
34, yeah.
And they have a program called Unstoppable Me. They have Girls That Code. They have programs that help women from university into the organisation that study technology and computer sciences. So here's an organisation that's proven if you have a pipeline and resources and programs to support young women coming into the technology industry, they're going to go work there. You know, if your job ad says we welcome women in this particular way, not in those words, but it's the language is designed to attract that particular applicant, then they're going to attract that particular applicant.
So the key message there is that you can't sit on your hands and expect it to magically resolve. You actually have to have things in place. You have to have initiatives.
Yes.
You have to have a strategy.
Yes.
Around how you're going to make this work.
Yes. And if you have two businesses, again, say the same revenue, same profitability, and you're trying to attract females to that organisation, you have to have a differentiator. You have to do something that they can see that's real. When they call someone else from the organisation before they accept a role and say, hey, I was in interview and Hugh told me that if I work there as a female, these are all the amazing things that happen. Can you quantify that? Can you tell me what's real? Like, those calls are going to go on in the background, aren't they? I mean, I would do that. So there has to be substance and grit in what is being delivered to attract those women.
Yeah, great advice.
You've got to adjust your values, you've got to live your values,
Yeah.
and you've got to assess yourself on whether or not you're delivering against them every day.
And yeah, you've seen it, great organisations that have diversity attract that. They attract it because it's a safer place to work.
This just illustrates the schism between the old world and the new world, the progressives, you know, and the fact that culture is a strategic weapon now.
Look, remember in the late 90s, early 2000s, I was wearing pinstripe three-piece suits to work with French cuffs and cufflinks. You know, who was I trying to be? I was trying to look like my boss. Now I wear a dress every day.
Yep. I used to wear a 5-inch heel so that I could be as tall as all of the blokes that I would be going to the pub with after the work day, because I was at everybody's chest level. And so to actually be in the conversation, to physically be in the conversation, I had to wear the equivalent of stilts as a small woman. And, you know, it's interesting to take the flat shoe back.
And Joe, take us back to that experience. I mean, what was it like in that environment?
It was fascinating. You know, I was sexually harassed numerous times. It was the norm here. It wasn't it was like most industry functions, someone had a crack, you know. And then and I remember when I became, you know, CEO of Job Capital, and one of the very first board meetings I had with some new customers coming in, my CFO at the time was great, terrific guy, early to mid 40s, wore the pinstripe suits, and everyone walked into the boardroom. They started talking about golf and started talking about footy, and I'm like, this is boring me to death. And then we all sat down, and someone asked a question about the business and pointed the question to my CFO. And this is what a great male ally does. He turned around and he said, Joe's the CEO of the company. She's best placed to answer that question. That's male allyship right there.
Yeah, very. And that story must be so common in the world even today.
Yeah.
I have a friend who I was providing some support to. She has a very successful business in medicinal cannabis in the States, and she was telling me how she would go and sit down in meetings with her IT head of IT, and in the meeting they would immediately address her IT guy, you know, as though he was running the business. And when she was confiding in me about how frustrated this made her, it was just so real, so visceral. You know, you can just imagine what it's taken to actually go on that journey to get to a point for you, Joe, where you know you are now a leading light. You've got a solution. You've got a positive, optimistic outlook, and you're really leading the way. And by bringing in male allyship, which I think is an absolutely critical ingredient in this, because we are all part of the successful vision, I think, of what it means to be on the other side when your business is out of business because you don't need it anymore. You know, that's pretty huge.
Absolutely. And I come from a strong line of matriarchs, which helps as well. And that is, women who have been strong and forceful in their own journeys. My mother was one of the first women to work as a manager when she's years and years ago. She's been retired 30 years now. But all those glass ceilings that she broke, she would tell me stories and come home from work crying and tell me stories about how she was treated. It was deplorable. And Friday drinks in the office in the afternoon, she never got invited. It was in the boss's office with all the blokes having beers and smoking around, which you could do then. But, it's changed a lot. But those stories that are, handed from her to me, it's pretty powerful to me go, you know what, we've come a long way. We have really come a long way. That doesn't happen anymore.
Very powerful, but what it also makes me think about is that not only have we come a long way, but in a lot of the big corporates who are still finding their way through to sort of this new world, vision of what a culture can be, some of these environments are so brutal, whether you're male or female.
Yes.
And, you've got to be pretty motivated to want to actually go on the journey to ride, go up the corporate ladder as a male or a female.
Yes.
But then if you have those additional issues of, the behaviour, the difficulties, the systemic bias, and all these other things that go on, it's no wonder why people start opting out and opting to want to do something different.
When you look at big tech companies, for example, Hugh, that are completely data driven, right? Bottom line driven. And if you look at, it's changing, but the way they used to work, as long as you're the best salesperson, you're making the most money, you had carte blanche over any of your behaviour, right? The biggest biller and the rainmakers never got fired for, touching someone up or doing something wrong.
And that sort of, you get away with anything if you perform mindset, also tends to reinforce the almost locker room experience where, all's fair in the battle kind of thing to get to win business and be successful. And you can see how men protect each other in those environments almost like a team sport. So you can see all sorts of things, all sorts of reasons why these become difficult environments.
And that's why male allyship is so critical at those points, because that's when it's not a woman that steps in and goes, hey, that's not right. It's her peer that steps in and says to the other guy, hey, hang on a second, that's not right.
Yeah, and it's
got to come from the head. It's got to come, a fish rots from the head. It's got to start with leaders who represent the behaviours that they want to see the people who work with them and for them maintaining.
Yeah.
And those leaders.
That's one of the things
and those leaders typically need to go through some personal transformation themselves because they probably have gone on a journey themselves where they've been inculcated into one experience over 10 or 15 years ago, and something turns the lights on, and maybe it's just turning on now for some people, but it's a journey that you've got to travel.
So forget this male pale stale thing. I find that term quite offensive for guys, because I know lots of men that look like that are not stale and that are fantastic and great to work with. So I think it's the same as, calling someone who's assertive that's a woman a bossy woman or aggressive. And I think it's just equally offensive. I think we have to just go back to who am I talking to and what is their driver, and let's not judge by the outside.
One of the things I loved that you said, Jo, was when you were talking about moving from an adversarial mindset to an allyship mindset where there is abundance for everyone. And so this shift in the status quo doesn't mean that the person who has agency loses. No. It means that they can use their agency to help everybody win. And that to me is so optimistic and exciting.
And again, it makes that person feel like, they're giving, but the gain is going to be greater. If I give and I participate, my gain is going to be greater.
Which in business is tantalising.
Very.
This has been such an inspiring conversation, Jo, and not only can I not wait to share it with my 8-year-old daughter, but also my 14-year-old and 25-year-old sons and talk to them about this issue. So it's been absolutely awesome having you on the show, and can't wait to catch up again.
Thank you so much, Hugh, and thank you, Liz. It's been such a pleasure and a joy to talk about something I'm completely passionate about. I could talk for the next 2 hours on.
Thank you, Joe. And to any of the ladies and fellas who have been listening to us today, or anybody in particular who'd like to join your mentorship program, either as a recipient or as a provider, how can they do that, Joe?
It's really simple. You go to inspiringrarebirds.com and you can select in the menu to join one of the programs as a mentee, which of course are paid, and we have scholarship programs provided by funding from government and local council and business. And also you can become a mentor. And the right time to become a mentor is today, because you don't know how much knowledge and wisdom you're actually sitting on. I'm going to have to run if that's all right.
Yeah, no,
Thank you so much. I think we've got heaps here.
Good to talk with
Well
you.
done, that was awesome.
Can't wait to see you in person, Hugh.
Thanks everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.